In the spring of 1863, a lone rider approached Fort Garland, Colorado, his saddlebag heavy, dripping something dark onto the dust. The soldiers who met him at the gate froze. Tom Tobin had returned from the wilderness, and he hadn't brought prisoners. He reached into the blood-soaked canvas and pulled out 2 severed heads, eyes still open, mouths frozen in their final moments. The heads of Felipe and Jose Vivian Espinosa, the West's first known serial killers. For months, these brothers had turned the Colorado Territory into a hunting ground, slaughtering over 30 innocent people with axes and knives in the most brutal ways imaginable. Lawmen had tried to stop them. Posses had failed. The army had been humiliated. But Tom Tobin? He succeeded in just 13 days. What kind of man accepts a contract to hunt down serial killers alone in the wilderness? What did he see out there, tracking 2 of the most sadistic murderers the frontier had ever known? And why did he choose to bring back their heads instead of their bodies? This is the story of the most brutal manhunt in Old West history. A hunt that ended not with justice, but with raw frontier vengeance. The year was 1863. The Civil War raged in the East, but in the Colorado Territory, a different kind of terror had begun. The gold rush had flooded the region with miners, settlers, and drifters, easy prey for predators. Law enforcement was thin, corrupt, or non-existent. It was the perfect storm for violence. And into this chaos stepped the Espinosa brothers. Felipe Nerio Espinosa and his nephew Jose Vivian weren't common outlaws. They didn't rob stagecoaches or rustle cattle. They killed for ritual, for revenge, for something darker. Felipe claimed he was avenging the loss of his family's land to American settlers during the Mexican-American War. He said an angel had appeared to him in a vision, commanding him to kill 600 Americans as divine retribution. They struck without warning, ambushing lone travelers on mountain trails, massacring families in their cabins, mutilating their victims with axes. Bodies were found days later, hacked to pieces, sometimes with their hearts removed. Witnesses described the brothers as ghosts, appearing suddenly, killing silently, vanishing into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Panic spread. Entire towns emptied. Miners refused to work alone. The territorial governor offered rewards, but no one could catch them. Then the army stepped in. Colonel Samuel Tappan dispatched a full military unit to hunt the Espinosas. It should have been easy. Trained soldiers against 2 criminals. But Felipe and Vivian knew every canyon, every ridge, every hiding spot. They ambushed the soldiers, killed several, and escaped again. The army was humiliated, desperate. They needed someone who thought like the killers, someone who could move through the wilderness like a shadow, someone who understood the old ways of tracking, survival, and death. They needed Tom Tobin. Thomas Tate Tobin was already a legend by 1863. Born in Missouri in 1823, he'd come west at 14 and never looked back. He'd lived among the Ute and Apache tribes, learning their languages and tracking methods. He'd been a trapper, a scout, a guide for military expeditions. Kit Carson himself considered Tobin one of the finest trackers alive. But Tobin was more than a tracker. He was a killer when he needed to be, cold, efficient, and utterly fearless. He'd survived ambushes, bear attacks, and Apache raids. He knew how to read broken twigs, disturbed dirt, the faintest scent on the wind, and he knew how men behaved when they were hunted. In May 1863, Colonel Tappan sent for Tobin. The offer was simple: find the Espinosas, kill them, bring proof. Tobin accepted. He took his 15-year-old nephew as his only companion, packed his rifle, and rode into the mountains. He would return in less than 2 weeks, with 2 heads in a sack. Tobin didn't chase the Espinosas. He studied them. While the army had blundered through the wilderness, announcing their presence with campfires and loud voices, Tobin moved silently. He examined every crime scene, read every track, understood the brothers' patterns. They hunted at dawn. They preferred isolated trails. They struck near water sources where travelers stopped to rest. Felipe and Vivian had made one critical mistake. They believed they were untouchable. After months of evading capture, they'd grown arrogant. They left trails. They stayed in the same general area. They didn't expect anyone to actually hunt them the way they hunted others. Tobin followed those trails like a predator stalking prey. For days, he and his nephew moved through the Sangre de Cristo range, sleeping in the open, eating cold rations, speaking in whispers. Tobin noticed fresh tracks near La Veta Pass, 2 men moving north. He found a recent campsite with still warm ashes. They were close, but the Espinosas weren't easy to corner. They had survival instincts honed by months on the run. Twice Tobin lost their trail in rocky terrain. Once he suspected they'd doubled back, possibly aware they were being followed. Then, on the morning of the 13th day, Tobin saw smoke rising from a canyon below. He crept to the edge and looked down. There they were, Felipe and Vivian Espinosa, sitting beside a small fire, roasting meat. They had no idea death was watching them from above. Tobin could have called out, demanded surrender. He could have tried to take them alive, but he knew what they were, butchers who'd shown no mercy to women, children, or unarmed men. They'd killed 32 people, maybe more. They'd promised to kill 600. Tom Tobin raised his Hawken rifle, took aim, and made a choice. If you love dark, real stories from the Old West, the ones that show just how brutal the frontier really was, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps a lot. And now back to the hunt. Tobin fired. The shot echoed through the canyon. Jose Vivian jerked backward, hit in the chest, dead before he hit the ground. Felipe lunged for his rifle, but Tobin was already reloading, a skill he'd perfected over decades. He fired again. Felipe stumbled, wounded but still moving. Tobin descended into the canyon. Felipe tried to crawl away, bleeding, gasping. Tobin walked up to him, calm as ice, and finished him with a bullet to the head. Then came the part that would make Tobin a legend and a nightmare. Tom Tobin stood over the bodies of the Espinosa brothers and considered his options. He was deep in the wilderness, days from the nearest fort. Transporting 2 full corpses on horseback would be slow, difficult, and by the time he arrived, decomposition would make identification nearly impossible. The army had asked for proof. Tobin decided to give them proof they couldn't question. He drew his knife. What happened next depends on which historical account you believe. Some say Tobin decapitated both brothers on the spot. Others claim he only took Felipe's head initially, then returned for Jose's. Either way, the result was the same. Tom Tobin severed the heads of Felipe and Jose Vivian Espinosa, wrapped them in a blood-soaked sack, and tied them to his saddle. He left the bodies where they fell, food for scavengers. The Espinosas had shown no respect for their victims' remains. Tobin saw no reason to show respect for theirs. The ride back to Fort Garland took days. The heads decomposed in the summer heat. The smell was unbearable. Tobin's nephew later said it was the longest, most horrifying journey of his life. But Tobin showed no emotion. He'd done the job. Now he would collect his payment. When they arrived at Fort Garland, soldiers gathered in disbelief. Some were horrified. Others were relieved. The terror was finally over. Colonel Tappan examined the heads, confirmed the identities through descriptions from witnesses, and declared the Espinosa threat eliminated. Tobin dumped the heads on the colonel's desk and demanded his payment, a modest fee and some supplies. That was all he wanted. No glory, no ceremony. He'd hunted killers before. This was just another job. But for the people of Colorado Territory, it was deliverance. Families returned to their cabins. Miners went back to work. The Espinosa nightmare was over, ended not by the law or the army, but by one man with a rifle and the skills to use it. Yet questions lingered. Why had Tobin chosen decapitation? Was it purely practical, or was there something darker at work? Had the hunt changed him? Had he become in some way as cold and merciless as the men he'd killed? The aftermath of Tom Tobin's hunt was stranger than the hunt itself. The heads of the Espinosa brothers were reportedly pickled in alcohol and displayed as grim trophies, a warning to would-be killers. For years, rumors circulated about their final resting place. Some said they ended up in a traveling carnival. Others claimed they were buried quietly. After public outcry, the truth was lost to history like so many details of the Old West. Tom Tobin? He returned to his ranch, collected his payment, and went back to his life. No interviews, no celebrations. He'd killed dangerous men before, and he'd kill again if necessary. The Espinosas were just two more names in a long list of violent men who'd crossed his path. But the legend grew. Stories spread about the man who'd hunted serial killers alone, who'd brought back heads as proof, who'd succeeded where the army had failed. Some called him a hero. Others whispered that he was too comfortable with killing, too willing to deliver frontier justice without trial or mercy. The historical record shows that Tobin was never prosecuted, never questioned, never punished for the brutal way he'd ended the Espinosas. In the Colorado Territory of 1863, results mattered more than methods. The killing had stopped. That was enough. Years later, when historians began studying the case, they uncovered disturbing details. Felipe Espinosa had kept a journal, found near his body documenting each murder. He'd written about his divine mission, his hatred of Americans, his plan to kill hundreds more. The journal confirmed what Tobin had suspected. The Espinosas would never have stopped. They believed God himself had ordered them to kill. Did Tom Tobin know this when he pulled the trigger? Did he see that journal before he drew his knife? We'll never know. Tobin rarely spoke about the hunt in his later years. When asked, he'd simply say he'd done what needed to be done. But one question still haunts historians. What if Tobin had missed that first shot? What if the Espinosas had ambushed him instead? Felipe had promised to kill 600 Americans. He'd only reached 32 when he died. In a grim way, Tom Tobin may have saved hundreds of lives by taking two in that canyon. The case of the Espinosa brothers remains one of the most disturbing episodes in Old West history. A reminder that serial killers existed long before modern criminal psychology had a name for them. And sometimes the only way to stop them was to send someone equally comfortable with death. Tom Tobin died in 1904 at the age of 81 in his home in southern Colorado. He was buried quietly with little fanfare. No monuments were erected. No streets were named after him. But his legend never died. He remains the man who hunted the West's first serial killers and brought back their heads to prove it. The story of Tom Tobin forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the Old West. Justice wasn't blind, it was brutal. There were no trials for the Espinosas, no juries, no appeals, just one man with a rifle, a knife, and the will to end a killing spree the only way he knew how. Was Tom Tobin a hero? Or was he simply a killer hunting killers? A man so shaped by frontier violence that he could decapitate two human beings and feel nothing? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. He was a product of his time, a time when survival often meant becoming as ruthless as your enemies. The heads he brought back weren't just proof. They were a message, a warning. In the wild, lawless territories of 1860s America, this was the price of terror. This was what happened when you killed innocent people and thought you could escape into the mountains forever. Tom Tobin knew those mountains better than anyone, and he knew that in the wilderness, there's always something more dangerous than you. If you want more true stories from the darkest corners of the Old West, the ones history tried to forget, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. These stories need to be told, and your support makes that possible. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? City and country. I'd love to know how far these Old West nightmares are traveling. And don't go anywhere. There's another Old West nightmare waiting for you in the next video. Because the frontier was full of men like Tom Tobin. Men who walked the line between hero and monster. Men who brought heads back from the wilderness.
Thank you.